Chapter 61. The Informant. The Death Eaters have an intelligent source in the Order of the Phoenix? Who is it? Dumbledore finally confirmed something after listening to Snape's words and continued to press him for more information. I don't know. It could be anyone. They can't be exposed so easily. The Dark Lord will always find an opportunity. Maybe next time, or the time after that, he will succeed. I know he won't give up. Snape's voice trembled, but he told Dumbledore everything he knew. Immediately afterward, Snape seemed to have made up his mind. The balance in his heart swayed to the other side, and he pleaded with Dumbledore, "Hide her! Hide them, I beg you!" "And what are you willing to give in exchange, Snape?" Dumbledore asked calmly, his eyes steady as he looked at Snape. Snape's face changed from one of struggle to one of slight daze. He then said softly, "Anything will do." Dumbledore saw that Snape had finally made up his mind, and a weight lifted from his heart. He nodded and said softly, "Remember what you said today. I will find a way to protect the Lily family. If there is any change on Tom's side, let me know. You know how to find me." Snape, now seemingly drained of strength, nodded numbly. He then asked, "Is that Anduin you mentioned earlier, the one who rescued that bastard Sirius?" Dumbledore nodded. "Yes, and he was also sorted into Slytherin. But he is much firmer than you." "A Slytherin? Well, maybe I made the wrong choice at the beginning. Help me give this to him as a thank you." Snape handed Dumbledore a small bottle of potion. "It seems you are not so hopeless. Maybe one day you can express your gratitude to him face to face," Dumbledore said, smiling as he took the crystal bottle from Snape. Meanwhile, the Anduin they were talking about had fallen into a deep sleep. The next day, James took Anduin to retrieve the luggage he had left at Sirius's house. With the seamless extension bag, Anduin could carry all of his belongings with him. James was very shocked by the changes in Sirius's house. He knew Sirius's house was usually untidy, and now he could hardly believe his eyes when he saw it neat and tidy. "So, you helped that black guy clean up?" "That's really amazing," James said, refreshing his impression of Anduin once again. Anduin didn't think it was a big deal, and then went with James to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries to see Sirius. Sirius was not one to stay idle and didn't stay in the hospital bed at all. If it weren't for James and Anduin's visit, he wouldn't even have stayed in the ward. James and Anduin were relieved to see that Sirius still had the strength to jump around. After saying goodbye to Sirius, they returned to the Potter's place before lunch. "Anduin, while you're staying here, just let us know if you need anything. After all, you've helped us so much," Lily said with a smile during lunch, watching Anduin tease little Harry. James nodded in agreement. Hearing Lily's offer made Anduin a little embarrassed. He smiled and said, "I'm already very satisfied with how much you've taken care of me. There's no need to be so polite." Seeing Anduin's modesty, Lily felt a bit uneasy. After thinking for a moment, she said, "By the way, aren't you very interested in the amulets and protective magic I gave you? I can teach you as much as possible during this time. You can also check out the Potter family's library. I think you can find what you want there." Anduin's face lit up with joy. "Really? That's great. Professor Flitwick has always told me that you are his most proud disciple, and I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask you." Lily saw Anduin's eagerness to learn and couldn't help but think of the former student she once was. Days passed, and Lily couldn't help but notice how Anduin's characteristics mirrored her own. Coming from a Muggle background, he was diligent and had a strong thirst for knowledge. His black pupils and long black hair, along with his Slytherin origin, reminded her of another former close friend. Lost in her memories, Lily was abruptly brought back to the present by Harry's untimely crying. She glanced at little Harry, her eyes filled with love once again. After lunch, and once Harry was coaxed to sleep, Lily took Anduin to the underground safe house where a fierce battle had once taken place. The room had since been cleaned up, with most of the sundries removed, making it a suitable practice classroom. Standing in the room, Lily addressed Anduin, "I've seen your floating charm and pulling charm before. Both are very impressive. You must have spent a lot of time practicing those spells. You can practice magic here, and I can spar with you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll help as much as I can." Anduin listened attentively to Lily's words. After a moment of thought, he said, "When I was practicing spells recently, I found some of them difficult to master. For example, the Iron Armor spell. Either the spell fails, or the strength of the Iron Armor spell isn't strong enough. It's not as effective as the obstacle spell I learned. Why is that?" "What? You've started practicing the Iron Armor charm? That's not a spell you can easily master at your age. Even many Aurors who have just joined the Ministry of Magic struggle to use this spell proficiently," Lily said, surprised. She looked at Anduin with newfound respect. She herself had only gradually mastered the Iron Armor charm by the 5th grade, and many students couldn't cast it successfully even after graduation. "So, is this spell particularly difficult? I didn't think the incantation was complicated," Anduin asked, puzzled. It wasn't just the Iron Armor spell. He also struggled with spells like the Straightless Stretching spell, Guardian Charm, and Illusionary Charm. He was sure he was reciting the spells correctly. Lily, realizing that Anduin had some understanding of the Iron Armor spell, said, "All right, cast the Iron Armor spell for me. I'll see what the problem is." Anduin nodded and prepared to cast the spell, eager to receive Lily's guidance. Thanks to Fangxingsuyan for the reward, and thanks to the book friend 22109212934474 for the reward. End of this chapter. Chapter 62, Magic Output. Anduin nodded, then raised his wand and exclaimed, "Protego!" With the sound of Anduin's incantation, the magic within him surged, and a shield-shaped barrier began to form at the tip of his wand. However, the shield appeared weak and dissipated like a bubble after only a few moments. Lily was amazed when she saw that Anduin could actually cast the shield charm. It seemed that her little brother had very precise control over his magic. She remembered that when she first started using the shield charm, her incantations had no effect at all. Immediately after, Lily asked Anduin to repeatedly cast the shield charm several times. Anduin complied, but each time, the charm either flickered a few times before disappearing or was as weak as his initial attempt. Lily quickly identified the issue and said to Anduin, "I think I understand. Your spells are fine, and your magic control is precise, but it's still difficult for you to successfully cast spells in your current state. This is actually normal." Anduin tilted his head in confusion. There was no problem with the spell, yet it still couldn't be successfully cast. Was this a normal phenomenon? Did it have something to do with his condition? Lily didn't let Anduin ponder for too long. She explained, "Let me give you an example, and you'll understand. You are a Muggle-born, so you should know about water pipes and valves. Usually, when we cast spells and chant incantations, it's like opening a valve in our body. Our magic is like water, which flows out through an invisible pipe. This pipe isn't as rigid as iron, but more like a living hose. Our ability to control magic ensures that this pipe directs the water to the right place without it flowing astray. If our control is strong, we can even manage the flow rate and density. If we lack control, we can't maintain a steady flow. The stronger the magic, the faster the water flows, making it harder to control. But this isn't your problem. Your control over magic is astonishing." Lily paused before continuing. "However, to determine whether a spell is successful, besides controlling the magic, there's another crucial factor: whether your pipe is thick enough. Even if a small pipe is full of water, the output will still be limited. This is your situation. The shield charm is a defensive spell that consumes a lot of energy. It can resist most dark spells and black magic, including the unforgivable curses. To cast the shield charm, you need not only to control the magic, but also to ensure that the magic you inject is sufficient and strong enough." When Anduin heard Lily's metaphor, he immediately understood. The magic output per unit time wasn't enough to support such a powerful spell. He then asked, "Then, how can I make my pipe big enough, or how can I output enough magic?" Lily smiled and replied, "It seems you still don't fully understand. The so-called pipe is your body. You are young now, and your body hasn't fully grown. Naturally, it's difficult to release powerful spells. As you age and your physique improves, casting spells with your current control will become much easier. Besides making the pipes in your body thicker, you can also increase the flow rate, ensuring that the infused magic is enough to support the spell. However, I don't recommend this. If you forcefully accelerate the infusion of magic, it could be very harmful to your body. If your physique isn't strong enough, the pipe might burst, causing physical damage. So that's it, Anduin said, finally understanding. Anduin couldn't cast spells effectively because he was still young. According to Lily, the issue was that the magic power he could output per unit time wasn't sufficient. One solution was to wait until his body matured, allowing it to circulate more magic power at once. Another method was to pressurize the magic, similar to how a pump pressurizes water, enabling rapid magic flow. However, this could lead to excessive pressure, potentially causing his body to explode from the strain. He recalled the Shen Feng Shadowless Curse. Despite its considerable power, it wasn't difficult for him to cast, suggesting that its magic power requirement wasn't overly high. This realization made him reassess the danger level of the Shenfeng Shadowless Charm. Its combination of power and low casting standard made it even more dangerous than some forbidden spells. As for the Iron Armor spell, he decided against practicing it recklessly due to its high risk. He didn't want to risk injury, which was unacceptable to him. It seemed impossible to practice these high magic requirement spells in the short term. However, since magic output was related to physical condition, he concluded that exercise and consuming foods that enhanced his physique might be effective. Anduin decided that he needed to maintain a regimen of exercise and cultivation. For food to enhance his physique, he planned to seek out Hagrid. He had previously consumed various magical animal meats, such as dragon liver, which had indeed enhanced his physique. If he continued this way, he believed he would soon be able to cast these spells successfully. Since practicing high magic requirement spells was temporarily out of reach, Anduin decided to change his focus. He planned to start with ancient runes, studying rune theory, and learning to create alchemical items. Concurrently, during his magic practice, he intended to learn occlumency and legilimency. It was said that Salazar Slytherin, the founder of Slytherin House, was a master of legilimency, and many renowned legilimency masters also hailed from Slytherin. Anduin wondered if he could follow in their footsteps. After considering his options, Anduin explained to Lily that he wanted to study runes and learn how to make alchemical tools with her guidance. "I'm relieved to see that you're not going to recklessly practice the Iron Armor spell. It's a very risky attempt," Lily said gently. "However, I'm not particularly skilled in ancient runes and alchemy. I can only teach you what I know. If you're really interested in alchemy, you might consider learning from Professor Dumbledore. I remember that Mr. Edgar Burns also has significant expertise in alchemy." "I don't think you need to be modest," Anduin replied. "I find that amulet you made very practical, and I would like to learn how to create magical items like it." After reviewing the research materials and textbooks Lily had left, Anduin could clearly see that she had considerable experience in runology. End of this chapter. Chapter 63. The Rune Workbench. "Okay, then we need to change locations. It seems the venue I set up won't work," Lily said with a shrug. The two quickly moved to the study. Lily wasn't sure how much Anduin knew about runes, so she asked him. "Runes, or rune work, are primarily composed of ancient runes. How much do you know about them?" Anduin had read some ancient rune books before, so he answered honestly, "I've read An Easy Guide to Ancient Runes, and I have a rune dictionary and a magic phonics table. I can barely recognize all these characters, and if I compare them with a dictionary, I can do some simple translations. However, I'm still at a loss when it comes to combining ancient runes into functional runes." "Anduin, your diligence and erudition are always amazing. You know more than most third-year students. In that case, how do you understand runes and rune work?" Lily looked at Anduin in surprise. Ancient Runes was an elective course in the 3rd grade, and some people knew so much in less than a year of enrollment. Anduin recalled what he had read and his own understanding, and said to Lily, "As far as I know, ancient runes are a magical script, which is why they are also called runes. The rune script that currently exists in the magical world is said to have been learned from the bones of some magical creatures, and some scholars believe it was created by gods. After years of study and research, wizards gradually mastered their respective meanings and functions. Over the course of history, many runes have been lost or forgotten. Runes are made of ancient runes through specific combinations, and they possess more specific and powerful magical abilities. To put it simply, if ancient runes are like letters, then runes are like words. If ancient runes are words, then runes are phrases or sentences. Lily's eyes lit up after listening to Anduin's explanation. She nodded and said, "It seems your understanding of runes is quite profound. Indeed, most runes are composed of ancient runes, and many spells are created by translating single or multiple combined runes into incantations." Anduin nodded to show that he understood. He had also learned about this in Professor Flitwick's spell club, where the senior student Quirrell was trying to invent a spell called the amplifying hearing spell. Runes were constantly being combined and modified, then translated into spells. Lily continued, "Yes, if you want to research runes, you must first master and learn the ancient rune script. Times are changing, and many new rune scripts have been discovered, while some lost texts have been recovered by archaeologists." It was the first time Anduin had heard that new texts were still being discovered, and he listened intently. Lily was pleased to see Anduin's focused expression. After all, teachers always appreciate students who love to learn. She continued, "Similarly, many spells or runes have been passed down, but the runes that make them up have been lost. Many scholars are working on restoration. Mr. Edgar Burns, whom you know, is a leader in this field. He once restored a new text from the ice-making spell. That word means lost, and several different combinations of runes have been developed." Oh! Anduin was surprised to learn this. He hadn't expected the bearded uncle he had seen before to have such abilities. Lily continued, "The research on the combination of runes into runes and the combination of runes into spells is more advanced. Many runes themselves contain multiple meanings. For example, this word." Lily drew a word on a piece of parchment and explained, "This word means fly, but it also means leave and go. It is one of the words combined into the floating spell." Anduin nodded, committing the information to memory. If you combine it in another way, you can form a flying spell or an expulsion spell. The Muggle-repelling charms rune combination also includes this word. It's a very practical rune, Lily concluded. Lily patiently explained to Anduin, "In the runes or rune combinations make up many spells and alchemy props. We usually have to first determine a core text, which we generally call the base text. Then, we combine other runes with this core text. The combination of magic runes is not like writing. There are no restrictions from left to right. The combinations can vary greatly. Some form circles, some form rectangles, and some even overlap. Many characters themselves are three-dimensional and need to be combined in a three-dimensional manner. To study runes, we need a specific tool called the Rune Workbench." Rune Workbench? Anduin was surprised. He had never thought that studying runes would require such specialized tools. "Yes, I'll show you now," Lily said. She took out her wand and tapped it in the air. A cabinet-like piece of furniture in the study opened, revealing a workbench decorated with intricate hollow patterns. It looked like a beautifully sculpted work table, but its complex construction indicated it was much more than that. Lily guided Anduin to sit in front of the workbench. Upon closer inspection, Anduin noticed that the tabletop was not flat. It was slightly concave with many hollow sections. A faint magical halo emanated from it, making it clear that this table was not meant for ordinary writing. Next, I'll demonstrate its functions. This workbench is highly functional, with capabilities such as collection, realization, combination, and testing. We can include some rune characters, including three-dimensional ones, and call up the recorded text, like this, Lily explained. She uttered a word, and a rune appeared on the workbench. It was the word fly that Lily had shown earlier. Anduin marveled at the magic, not just of the workbench, but also of the complex knowledge in rune literature. It greatly broadened his understanding. "Now, let's try some combinations," Lily continued. She spoke a few more words, and the runes combined skillfully and freely. It seemed to be a relatively simple combination, composed entirely of planes without forming a three-dimensional structure. End of this chapter. Chapter 64, Gifts. This is the rune combination for the floating spell. "Let's test it," Lily said, tapping the rune with her wand. The rune, composed of multiple smaller runes, lit up. She then injected magic through her wand, directing it through the rune towards a quill, which began to float. Anduin observed with fascination. Lily hadn't used the floating spell directly. Instead, she had channeled her magic through the rune, which then acted on the quill to produce the floating effect. This demonstration was far more intuitive than learning runes from books. Lily continued, "Many spells and runes have effects that are either very dangerous or cannot be tested directly on the workbench. Some highly skilled wizards can display runes through silent spellcasting and then test them. However, not many wizards can master silent spells. So what if they can't cast spells silently?" She took out a small crystal ball from the edge of the workbench and approached the rune. The rune was absorbed into the crystal ball. Anduin noticed 2 rows of similar crystal balls on the side of the workbench. Initially, he had thought they were decorations, but now he realized they were used to store runes. "In this way, we can save the runes and test them elsewhere," Lily explained with a smile. She then proceeded to explain the use of the rune workbench to Anduin, who was thoroughly impressed and developed a strong interest in rune research. "You can borrow the workbench while you're staying here. There are many texts inside. You can study them using the rune dictionary. I'll also explain some common rune combinations to you, including the protective runes and stress runes in my amulet," Lily offered, noticing Anduin's excitement. Overjoyed, Anduin exclaimed, "Really, thank you so much!" Lily nodded with a smile and explained how to use the rune workbench for his studies. Anduin was thoroughly enjoying himself. During this time, the Christmas gifts from his friends also arrived, albeit a little late due to his change of residence. Despite initially condemning Anduin's direct request for gifts, Vivian still sent him a set of magic symbols. Charles gave Anduin a poster of Ludo Bagman and mentioned in the greeting card that he was thrilled to receive the mahjong tiles. He had taught his family how to play mahjong and even sent his beloved poster. Ludo Bagman was the star hitter of the Wimborne Hornets and Charles's idol, but Anduin could only accept the gift with a smile. Professor McGonagall gifted Anduin a scarf, her favorite team scarf from the Apollo Arrows team. The scarf was light blue with a silver arrow embroidered on each side. Anduin had given up expecting special gifts from Quidditch fans. He even researched the Quidditch team that Professor McGonagall liked and found that their most brilliant record was in 1932 when they defeated the then European champion Fratza Eagles. The game lasted for 16 days, which Anduin confirmed with disbelief. Professor Flitwick, always considerate, gave Anduin a copy of The Fifth Element, Exploration, noting in the greeting card that it was actually a 6th grade book. However, he believed that with Anduin's current progress, he could already start learning from it. Anduin was very pleased with this gift, which, along with Vivian's, became one of his favorites. When Anduin opened Professor Slughorn's gift, he was a bit dumbfounded. The gift was a bottle of euphoria, a potion he was very familiar with. Anduin wondered if his head of house had also brewed a lot of euphoria to use as gifts. Hagrid's gift was simple, yet thoughtful, a leather cushion made of fur, which was both comfortable and warm. Anduin immediately put it to use. After examining the gifts from his friends, he settled onto the fur cushion and resumed his study of occlumency. This magic, along with legilimency, seemed to complement each other. Mastering occlumency would make learning legilimency easier. Books like Magic Defense Theory and Mystery of Magic Defense detailed this kind of magic. The process involved maintaining a calm and composed mental state, then channeling and controlling one's magical power. By merging one's thoughts with this power and enveloping the brain, one could defend against mind-reading and thought perception spells. This spell-free magic was challenging for most wizards due to the high level of self-control required. The easiest way to learn occlumency was to have a legilimency master assist by repeatedly performing legilimency on the learner, who would then practice defending against it. Through continuous training, the learner would become adept at closing their mind to such intrusions. However, Anduin had no intention of following this method. He didn't know any legilimency masters and was unwilling to let anyone freely access his thoughts. In the various magical texts Anduin had read, several methods for learning occlumency were described, including potion practice, passive practice, and self-imagination. The passive practice method involved allowing a legilimency master to invade the mind, then defending against it. Anduin dismissed this method outright. The potion practice method required drinking a tranquilizer beforehand to aid in practice, which Anduin considered viable since he had access to tranquilizers. The most challenging method was self-imagination, which Anduin referred to as contemplation. This involved emptying the mind and imagining another self within it. This imagined self could take on various forms. For instance, magic defense theory mentioned someone who visualized themselves as a dragon and then infused their consciousness with magical power. After some contemplation, Anduin decided to first observe his thoughts. He had a strong ability to control his magical power and a firm will. His meditation practice had also provided him with experience in regulating his thoughts. End of this chapter. Chapter 65. Occlumency. Anduin decided to dive right in. He first focused on regulating his breathing, then stood up and assumed the Hunyuan Zhuang posture, a fundamental stance in Tai Chi. When standing in this posture, most of the effort is spent on adjusting the body's alignment. One of the key points is to find the most coordinated positions for the neck, waist, crotch, and feet, and then maintain them. While standing, Anduin continuously adjusted subtle postures in various parts of his body based on his instincts. During this process, his mind was almost completely empty, free from distractions. He then directed his magic power to slowly flow into his brain. The most challenging part was attempting to immerse the magic into his consciousness. Anduin's goal was to visualize himself, not as a strange creature, but as a black hole devoid of any light. He then tried to draw magic into this black hole. Thanks to his regular practice, he quickly entered a state of deep concentration. Mobilizing his magic power was not difficult for him, but the visualization part took several attempts before he succeeded. After half an hour, Anduin ended his attempt and slowly opened his eyes. He was surprised by his state as he recalled the practice process. It wasn't that he expected to master this difficult magic quickly, but he was astonished that he might have actually succeeded in his first practice session. Comparing his experience with the descriptions in the magic book, Anduin confirmed that he had indeed mastered occlumency. During the practice, Anduin's progress felt almost natural. Visualizing himself as a black hole and controlling the magic to immerse in it was not difficult. Wrapping this magic power in his mind was also completed smoothly. This rapid cultivation speed was something Anduin had only experienced when learning the floating spell. Although he learned other spells relatively easily, they still required repeated practice to master. Occlumency, however, seemed as easy to grasp as the floating spell. Am I a genius at learning occlumency, or do I have an innate talent for it? Or perhaps my regular training and practice have given me an advantage in learning this type of magic. Just like my years of practicing superpower, maybe standing meditation not only helps regulate emotions, but also aids in learning spiritual magic? Anduin pondered various possibilities, feeling as though he was on the verge of understanding something profound. Shaking his head, Anduin forced himself to clear his thoughts. Regardless, the fact remained that his practice was successful. He decided to focus on mastering occlumency completely before considering other factors. He then attempted to run occlumency again, but the process was still somewhat clumsy. It seemed he needed more practice to use occlumency effortlessly. This successful experience excited Anduin, so he resolved to practice occlumency every night. Once he mastered this magic, he would try legilimency. He had a hunch that learning legilimency might be as straightforward as occlumency. In the following days, Anduin balanced his time between helping out at the potter's house, studying runes at the rune table, and practicing occlumency in his room at night. A week passed quickly, and it was soon time to return to school. Anduin packed his luggage, ready for the next chapter of his journey. With the bag sent by Sirius, Anduin no longer had to drag a large suitcase around. This holiday had been quite fruitful for him. The knowledge of runes he had acquired over the past few days would take some time to fully digest. After finishing his packing, Anduin was ready to go downstairs and join the Potters for one last breakfast before saying goodbye. Anduin, have you packed your luggage? Come sit down and have something to eat. We have a surprise for you later. Lily greeted him warmly as he descended the stairs, looking well-dressed. Though curious, Anduin obediently entered the dining room, where he began teasing Harry and eating breakfast. Over the past week, Rai had grown quite fond of this new big brother, always eager to play with him. Anduin playfully teased Harry with an apple, holding it just out of reach. Little Harry, desperate to catch it, nearly cried in frustration. Finally, Anduin placed the apple in Harry's arms, much to the toddler's delight. James, observing the interaction, smiled knowingly. Anduin, since you're heading back to Hogwarts today, Lily and I have prepared a special gift for you. I think you'll like it. Puzzled, Anduin replied, A gift? But I already received your Christmas present, which I loved. What more could you possibly give me? At that moment, Lily entered the room carrying a package and smiled at Anduin. This is to thank you for looking after and protecting Harry during the battle a few days ago. Knowing your interest in rune research, James and I prepared this gift for you. Anduin was about to refuse when Lily interrupted. Don't rush to refuse. Open it first and see what it is. Lily unwrapped the package to reveal a disc the size of a wash basin. It appeared to be made of stone with a metallic texture, and there was a book resting on top of it. James explained, Lily mentioned your interest in studying runes, so we prepared this for you. This is a rune disc. Its function is similar to that of a rune workbench. You can write runes and experiment with combining them. Lily added, Yes, this rune disc functions like a simple rune workbench. It allows for the realization and combination of runes, though it cannot record or test them. She then picked up the book on top of the disc and said, This is a magic text collection toolbook. It's blank and can hold up to 100 characters and 10 runes. I've already stored more than 40 common three-dimensional runes in it. General plane runes don't need to be included, but you can record any three-dimensional runes you encounter in the future. Anduin was deeply moved by their thoughtfulness. Thank you so much, both of you. This is an incredible gift. End of this chapter. Chapter 66. Back to School. However, since there is no crystal ball for storage, there is no way to test it, but I believe it is enough for learning and some simple research. How about it? Do you like it? Anduin explained. When Anduin realized that the Potters wanted to give him such an expensive gift, he initially wanted to refuse. However, he couldn't resist the desire in his heart. The allure of the gift was too strong. After accepting the rune disc, Anduin restrained his urge to study it immediately. He thanked the Potters profusely. Okay, Anduin, don't be so polite with us. It's getting late. I'll take you to the train station, James said with a smile. Anduin's Christmas vacation, filled with happy times with Sirius and the Potters, came to an end. After saying goodbye to James at the station, Anduin boarded the return train to Hogwarts. In the carriage, Vivian and Charles were already there, sharing snacks that Vivian had brought back from France. As soon as Anduin entered, Charles eagerly pulled him to sit down. Hey, Anduin, I heard from my aunt that you're amazing. Charles began, but Anduin cut him off with a look and shook his head. Charles fell silent. What are you talking about? What's so great? Vivian asked, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. It's nothing. I won a jackpot for Christmas. Nothing to show off, Anduin replied, not wanting to discuss his encounter with the Death Eaters. Being in Slytherin, he knew that if Vivian, the school's big gossip, found out, the whole school would know. Oh, is it? Vivian clearly didn't believe him and looked at Charles questioningly. Feeling the pressure, Charles made an excuse about friends from the academy waiting for him and slipped away. Humph! Vivian snorted in dissatisfaction. Seeing Anduin casually opening a book, she had no choice but to give up. Soon, she forgot about it and started chatting with Anduin about her experiences in France. They ate snacks and chatted, enjoying the steam train ride back to Hogwarts. Back at Hogwarts, Anduin resumed his usual routine, but made some changes to his study schedule. Since he couldn't practice powerful spells at the moment, he redistributed his time. He spent part of it practicing basic spells and transfiguration, and most of the rest studying spells and runes with the rune disc. He also dedicated 3 or 4 10-minute sessions to practicing occlumency. The day after returning to Hogwarts, Anduin couldn't resist visiting Hagrid. He brought a lot of condiments, planning to enjoy a few more meals at Hagrid's hut. The hut was now covered in a blanket of snow. Finding no one inside, not even Rein, Anduin walked to the fireplace and lit a fire. He was too familiar with the place to be polite. The bonfire in the fireplace burned brightly, driving out the cold air. Anduin used the stove to boil a pot of water and made a cup of tea. The large copper cup was quite suitable for him. Sitting on the sofa beside the campfire, assured of peace, he read a book, sipped tea, and enjoyed the warmth of the fire, spending his time comfortably. After an unknown period, he heard a dog barking outside the hut. Anduin knew Hagrid had returned. The quiet and comfortable feeling had made him lose track of time, and it was now dark outside. "Hey, Anduin, you're back," Hagrid greeted as he entered. Hagrid walked into the house carrying a huge object, just in time to see Anduin sitting by the fire. Anduin greeted him with a smile, and the swallow-tailed dog, Rein, excitedly ran up to rub against Anduin's feet. "Well, I just came back yesterday. Today happens to be the weekend, and school starts tomorrow, so I came over after lunch. Where have you been, and why did it take so long to come back?" Anduin asked. Hagrid shook the snow off his body and unloaded a large piece of meat from his shoulders onto the table. He smiled and said, "It's just a coincidence that you're here. Professor Kettleburn had previously cultivated a herd of ram cows in the Forbidden Forest. One of the cows happened to die today, and Professor Kettleburn asked me to help. The professor even gave me a large piece of beef." Anduin stepped forward to examine the meat carefully. He found that it was indeed a large chunk, essentially a whole beef leg with part of the body attached. It was at least half the size of a cow. "Is that ram cow very big? Can this kind of animal be kept in the Forbidden Forest? How many animals does Professor Kettleburn keep there?" Anduin asked, curious about the professor's collection of magical creatures. Hagrid chuckled. "The professor has really raised a lot. There are many magical animal communities in the Forbidden Forest, such as thestrals, hippogriffs, unicorns, and more. At the same time, the professor has also cultivated many magical biological communities, like ram cows, tepo warthogs, horned llamas, lunar beasts, and so on. These little guys cause a lot of trouble every year, and Professor Kettleburn is often heartbroken." As Hagrid spoke, he took off his coat. The professor said that raising and breeding these creatures is to restore their populations. Many magical creatures are endangered because they have high-value resources, making them easy targets for overhunting. But the professor believes this is too short-sighted. Only after the population is cultivated and grown can the resources produced by magical creatures be continuously harvested. Anduin nodded in approval. It seemed that the professor understood the importance of sustainable development. "I'm exhausted today. This cow is bigger than 3 normal cows. The blood from its body is the main ingredient for making potions. It took the professor and me a long time to deal with this corpse," Hagrid said, grabbing a copper cup and drinking a full glass of water in one go. Anduin studied the chunk of beef and said, "Hey, just right. With this beef, I'll treat you to a beef hot pot later." End of this chapter. Chapter 67, Anduin's Forbidden Forest Cabin. "Hot pot? What is that?" Hagrid asked, puzzled by the unfamiliar term. "It's delicious. Just wait and see. Let me handle the beef first," Anduin replied confidently. He then took out his wand and commanded the knife in Hagrid's room to cut up the beef. There was so much meat that they couldn't eat it all at once, so he decided to freeze some outside the hut. Next, Anduin retrieved a large copper pot he had bought in Chinatown from his linen space bag. He hadn't expected to use it so soon. He picked up a few pieces of charcoal from the stove, placed them in the copper gallbladder in the center of the pot, added water, and then cut some onion and ginger into it to cook. Anduin took out his chopsticks and said to Hagrid, "Okay, after the water boils for a while, we'll put the meat in and rinse it. Then we'll serve it with the sauce I made. That's it." Hagrid, holding a fork, sat at the table and asked, "It's that simple? Is it any different from ordinary boiled water?" "You'll know once you taste it," Anduin replied with a smile. Hagrid began his first hot pot experience. The ordinary sliced meat, when paired with the sesame sauce prepared by Anduin, created a complex fragrance that tantalized his taste buds. Hagrid couldn't get enough and kept eating. The two continued to enjoy their hot pot, having a great time. After the meal, Hagrid burped contentedly and said, "Anduin, you know a lot. If only you could live here. The comment was made casually, but it sparked an idea in Anduin's mind. It wasn't impossible. Usually, he stayed in his room in the Slytherin lounge when he wasn't in class. While the underground view of the lake was nice, it couldn't compare to the wide-open space here, where he could enjoy delicious food by the bonfire. Living here occasionally seemed like a good idea, so Anduin said to Hagrid, "It's not impossible to live with you occasionally. It's a big place, and it's convenient for me to practice spells and martial arts. But you only have one house. Where would I sleep?" Hagrid, excited at the thought of having company, replied, "It doesn't matter. I can build a room for you next to mine. There are plenty of trees in the Forbidden Forest. It will take a few days, but I can get you a room." Anduin thought about it and agreed. "That's fine. I'll come to help in the afternoons starting tomorrow. Once the small house is built, I'll move over to keep you company. Although I can't stay with you every day, I can stay here for 2 or 3 days each week." Hearing this, Hagrid nodded enthusiastically. As the guard of the Forbidden Forest, he often felt lonely, despite keeping some small animals for company and occasional visits from Professor Kettleburn. Having Anduin around would be a welcome change. After their discussion, Anduin returned to the castle. The next day, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Anduin, having finished his classes, ran towards Hagrid's hut. When he arrived, he found that Hagrid had already chopped down a lot of wood and stones and piled them beside the hut. Hagrid himself was cleaning up the land next to the hut and had already leveled a 10-square-meter area. He seemed more enthusiastic than Anduin had expected. Seeing this, Anduin quickly stepped forward to help. Together, they cleaned up the surrounding ground, cut 4 thick logs with a cutting spell, and inserted them into the 4 corners of the leveled area. They then used magic to cut the stones into uniform pieces and lined them up to cover the ground, ensuring there were no uneven spots. After all, it is not a brick and cannot guarantee smoothness. Immediately afterward, the outer wall was built, and the wood was cut and laid on the ground. Hagrid used nails and a hammer to fasten the wall. Once the horizontal and vertical boards were all nailed, Anduin used the levitation charm to control the boards and stand them on 2 stakes. Hagrid then nailed the boards to the stakes, thus completing 1 wall. After repeating this process 3 more times, the 4 walls were installed. One of the walls was attached to Hagrid's hut, so it was directly nailed to it. By the time all this was done, it was night. Anduin followed the same routine, and after having a hot pot meal with Hagrid, he returned to the castle. Over the next few days, Anduin went to Hagrid's house after class to help build the house. They worked on the roof, indoor fireplace, wooden floor, door, and windows. Hagrid even kindly added a small balcony outside Anduin's room, so he could sit outside to rest or have afternoon tea. There were 2 doors in the room. One led directly outside, where a 3-step wooden staircase descended to Hagrid's vegetable garden, and the other door led directly into Hagrid's house. Hagrid personally made a lot of furniture for Anduin's small room. Hagrid's carpentry skills were truly impressive. He also laid out a leather carpet, and soon the room was completed. Anduin moved in next to Hagrid. The style of the room was very similar to Hagrid's cottage. The bed, table, chairs, and wardrobe all had a rustic feel. The carpet and bed were made of fur, giving the whole hut the ambiance of a hunter's lodge. Since Anduin often stayed with Hagrid, he was rarely seen at Hogwarts. Even Vivian had trouble finding him sometimes. Apart from attending classes, Anduin seemed to disappear. He wasn't even seen during dinner time. After finishing his History of Magic course, Anduin didn't go directly back to Hagrid's hut. Instead, he turned upstairs and walked into a boys' bathroom where a man was waiting for him. "Randall, you're on time," Anduin said with a slight smile as he looked at Randall Rosier. "Anduin, how can you let me go?" Rosier asked, his voice filled with fear. Anduin stepped forward, placing one hand on Rosier's shoulder. "Don't talk about me like I'm a devil. You can see that I haven't treated you badly, haven't I? Your big brother was killed, and now your succession in the family has improved. By the way, did you bring this month's protection fee?" Rosier, already very nervous, trembled even more after hearing Anduin's words. "Evan's death really has something to do with you. It's been a mess. I don't have any money. I took a risk and brought a few magic books from the family. Can I repay the debt with those? Playing Magic Awakening for the past 2 days has been a bit addicting. Does anyone want to join me? My magic history is a thief. End of this chapter. Chapter 68, The Bloody Potion. After speaking, he handed Anduin a few books. Anduin took them and flipped through them. He found that there were 4 books he had never seen before, 2 about black magic, 1 about potions, and 1 was actually a rune atlas, which recorded many rare rune combination formulas. Yes, these 4 books will cover your 4-month protection fee. After I copy them, I will return the originals to you. How about it? I'm still very kind, Anduin said happily. Hearing Anduin's words, Rosia let go of his uneasy heart and nodded quickly in agreement. What about that guy Travers? Hasn't he tried to make trouble for me recently? You know, I made him lie down in the owl shack all afternoon, Anduin asked with a smile as he put away the books. He's tried to trouble you more than once, but you're elusive every day except for class time, and he can't find you at all. Recently, he's been hanging out with Wilkes and Yaxley seniors, thinking about how to deal with Gryffindor all day, Rosier said truthfully. Anduin thought for a while. It seemed that he really seldom stayed in the castle recently. Basically, he ran back to the Forbidden Forest cabin to study magic after class. As for the conflict between them and Gryffindor, Anduin didn't intend to intervene. He thought their fight would be a bloodbath and ran to remind Charles once. Later, he found out that the child was really just a child, and the fight was more like a prank. After that, Anduin was too lazy to mix it up. Okay, Rosier, your performance is good. If you have any trouble, you can tell me. The protection fee will not be paid in vain. I will cover you in the future, Anduin said. Rosier was too eager to hide from Anduin to dare take the initiative to find him. He had to deal with it and just wanted to get rid of this guy quickly. After the 2 parted ways, Anduin returned to the hut and flipped through Rosier's books. Sure enough, the knowledge inherited from those big families with a long history is the biggest foundation. Does it even have blood magic? Anduin read carefully and learned a lot. One of the black magic books recorded a lot of knowledge about blood magic, and the Book of Potions even contained the formula for the Mad Blood Potion. The Mad Blood Potion, the full name being Dragon Mad Blood Supplement, has dragon blood as its main raw material. It is made by contaminating dragon blood with a lot of vicious raw materials and then brewing it. It is a forbidden drug. It has a violent effect, and the resistance to magic spells can also be greatly increased. The power and control of magic spells will also be greatly enhanced, but the side effects are very obvious. After the drug effect ends, there will be significant blood loss, and there is a certain probability that people will go mad and lose their minds. It's no wonder that Evan Rosier has this potion, but if you dare to drink this potion, should you be called brave or brainless? Anduin laughed sarcastically after reading the description of the potion. Next, Anduin was ready to copy the magic books. It was not advisable to copy directly with the copying spell, as the copied version would disappear after the magic power dissipated. The proper way was to prepare a blank book or parchment and ink and use the text copy spell to transcribe the text so that the book could be preserved for a long time. After being busy for a while, Anduin finally rewrote the 4 books with magic spells. He could practice the magic spell during the rewriting process, which was not boring for him. Fortunately, this was not the kind of magic with magical power. Most of the magic books were isolated copies. One must be familiar with spell resolving and alchemy production to copy successfully. Anduin had heard that there was a sonnet of the wizard that would even curse the person who read it, making them speak in limericks for the rest of their lives. It seemed necessary to speed up the process. The study of runes is essential, especially if you want to learn how to unravel and break curses. This knowledge is crucial to avoid being harmed by someone wielding a curse book. With a plan in mind, Anduin resumed his tedious rune studies, constantly using the rune disc to visualize the runes and learning to combine various common runes from the Magic Rune Collection. This gave him a more thorough understanding of the meanings and concepts behind various runes and a deeper comprehension of these spells. When analyzing the obstacle spell earlier, Anduin felt he had gained a more profound understanding of it. His control while casting the spell became more solid, and shaping the spell became much easier. Now, Anduin could condense the obstacle spell into a fist-sized ball, which he called an obstacle ball. This greatly increased its power when launched. Recently, he had been researching whether it was possible to make the shaped obstacle ball explode upon impact. 2 weeks later, during a transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall was explaining the differences and precautions between transformation spells and transfiguration spells. Anduin concluded that a transformation spell involves a complete transformation, while a transfiguration spell involves a partial transformation. However, Professor McGonagall continued to elaborate for an hour. Okay, that's it for this class. In the next class, you will start trying to transform a mouse into a snuff box. This requires very hard practice and might be the question for your final exam. Professor McGonagall finally concluded. Anduin found Professor McGonagall's thoroughness a bit excessive but appreciated her dedication. Just as he was about to pack up and head back to his hut, Professor McGonagall stopped him. After the other students had left, she said, "Anduin, Headmaster Dumbledore is looking for you." Anduin guessed that the award from the Ministry of Magic might have arrived. He couldn't help but feel overjoyed and replied with a smile, "Yes, Professor McGonagall, I'll go right now." The password to the headmaster's office is Fizzing Whizbee, Professor McGonagall informed him. She then added, "Anduin, I heard about what happened at Christmas. Your courage is commendable, but as a professor, I must remind you to pay attention to your own safety. Such situations are not for a young wizard like you to handle alone." Professor McGonagall spoke to Anduin with a serious expression. Anduin knew she was concerned about him, so he nodded with a smile. "Don't worry, Professor. I won't put myself in danger lightly, but when danger comes, staying calm and decisive is the best way to protect oneself." Professor McGonagall knew Anduin was very rational, but as an elder, she couldn't help but offer advice. Hearing Anduin's response, she nodded and said, "All right, you may go now. Headmaster Dumbledore is in his office." End of this chapter. Chapter 69, Buffy's Brain Refresher. Anduin said goodbye to Professor McGonagall, ascended the main tower, and found a gargoyle on the 8th floor. After reciting the password taught by Professor McGonagall, the gargoyle jumped aside, and the stone wall behind it split into 2 halves, revealing a spiral staircase that slowly ascended. When Anduin entered the office, Dumbledore was standing behind the door, teasing a beautiful flaming red bird on a perch, which looked very similar to the phoenix he had seen in picture books. Dumbledore turned around, looked at Anduin with a smile, and said, "Sorry, Fawkes has been feeling lonely recently. I haven't spent much time in the office, so I just spent time with him and didn't notice you." "I just came in, Mr. Headmaster. Is Fawkes a phoenix? He looks very similar to the phoenixes I've seen in picture books," Anduin asked curiously, smiling at Dumbledore. "Yes, your observation is very keen. As a phoenix, he has very sensitive emotions. It makes me, an old man, feel quite embarrassed," Dumbledore joked while Fawkes, looking aloof and cold, seemed to dislike the headmaster's teasing. Dumbledore could only shrug his shoulders to ease the awkwardness. Anduin found it very interesting to see this phoenix expressing such rich emotions and couldn't help but take a few more glances at Fawkes. "All right, he's still very shy. Staring at him will make him embarrassed. Come and sit," Dumbledore said, noticing that Fawkes didn't pay much attention to Anduin. Quite arrogant, Anduin thought silently, following Dumbledore to the desk and sitting down. He finally had the time to take a closer look at the headmaster's office. It was a spacious, beautiful circular room with portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses hanging on the wall behind the desk. The people in the portraits were in various states. Some were deep in thought, some were napping, and some were not in their frames at all. One of them saw Anduin looking at him and glared back. "Would you like some candy?" "I've been addicted to lemon snow treasure candy recently. The sweet and sour taste always reminds me of my youth," Dumbledore smiled, taking out a candy jar from the cabinet next to him and offering it to Anduin. "Thank you, Professor, but I prefer chocolate. There's a saying in our Muggle world, the more you like to recall the past, the older you are. You look young, so maybe you should spend more time thinking about the future." Anduin politely declined the candy bowl Dumbledore handed him. Hearing this, Dumbledore raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's a wise saying. It shows you have your own opinions, so I won't force you." He then took back the candy bowl and popped a small handful of candies into his mouth. "Does the headmaster love sweets that much?" Anduin wondered, noticing the abundance of sweets in the room and the fact that the password to the office was also a type of candy. Let's get down to business. You might have guessed why I called you here. The award order from the Ministry of Magic has arrived, and I wanted you to take a look at it," Dumbledore said, smiling as he handed Anduin a parchment with the Ministry of Magic's seal. Anduin took the parchment and read it. The document expressed gratitude and commended Anduin for his courageous assistance in confronting and arresting the Death Eaters during the Christmas period. Skipping the formalities, Anduin quickly looked at the reward section. "I hereby reward Mr. Anduin Wilson with 1 silver medal of valor from the British Ministry of Magic and 500 gold galleons." Yes, this is interesting, Anduin thought, feeling a sense of satisfaction towards the Ministry of Magic. He also admired the efficiency of Minister Millicent Bagnold. She truly deserved to be recognized as a good minister in the magical world. In a good mood, Anduin couldn't help but mentally praise Minister Barnold, and he found himself laughing. Dumbledore noticed Anduin's laughter, but did not interrupt him. After a moment, Dumbledore took out a small box wrapped in delicate flannel and a large bag of gold galleons and handed them to Anduin. "Here you go, our little hero. This is your prize from the Ministry of Magic," Dumbledore said. Anduin eagerly accepted the items. The weight of the gold galleons gave him a sense of solidity, but he set the leather bag aside without opening it. Instead, he focused on the box containing the medal. Inside, lying quietly, was a round silver medal attached to a dark, short ribbon. Delicate patterns were engraved on it, and a capital M was inscribed in the center, symbolizing the Ministry of Magic. Originally, the Minister of Magic wanted to present this to you personally. She believes that young people like you are much needed as role models. However, after my persuasion, Millicent agreed to your request to keep this private for now. But there may be opportunities in the future where she might reveal it publicly. Dumbledore explained with a smile as he saw Anduin examining the medal with excitement. "Thank you, Professor, and please convey my gratitude to the Minister. I am very satisfied with the current arrangement," Anduin replied, still smiling. "By the way, there is another gift for you, from an unnamed friend," Dumbledore added, as he seemed to suddenly remember something. He took out a crystal bottle from the drawer next to him and handed it to Anduin. Anduin examined the bottle. It contained a potion, and the crystal bottle itself was very delicate, quite different from the usual glass potion bottles he used. He couldn't help but look at Dumbledore with curiosity. "This is a Buffy brain-refreshing potion, which is very difficult to make. I have checked it, and it is of excellent quality. It can significantly enhance the user's brain power, but the effect is very strong. An ounce in water is sufficient. Too much can cause headaches, nausea, and even coma," Dumbledore explained. Anduin was astonished. The Buffy brain-refreshing potion was famous and extremely valuable, costing at least hundreds of galleons on the market, and it was often in a priceless state due to its rarity and the difficulty of its production. Any mistake in the process could easily turn it into a poison that could render someone a fool. Who could have given him such a precious gift? "This potion is too valuable. Can I know who gave it to me?" Anduin asked solemnly, looking at the crystal bottle in his hand, unable to contain his curiosity. End of this chapter. Chapter 70. Unspoken Gifts and Unseen Dangers. The person who provided this potion wishes to remain anonymous, so I must respect their wishes. It is a gift of goodwill. If you choose not to accept it, I fear it might sadden them, Lido explained, carefully avoiding any mention of Snape's involvement. Snape's identity needed to remain a secret for now. "I understand, thank you, and please extend my gratitude to your friend," Anduin replied, not wanting to appear ungrateful. He wasn't one to refuse a gift, especially one as valuable as this potion. The allure of such a powerful concoction was too strong to resist. "I will convey your thanks. By the way, the Potters and Sirius inquired about your well-being a couple of days ago. Unfortunately, I haven't had much time to stay in my office and look after the students. Is there anything you would like me to tell them? Dumbledore asked. He had been constantly on the move, either lobbying members of the Wizengamot or strategizing with the Order of the Phoenix. His time in the office was mostly spent writing and reading letters, monitoring Death Eater activities, and dealing with the Dark Lord, which had drained much of his energy. Anduin realized it had been a while since he had communicated with his friends. Could you please tell Sirius not to let the room I spent so much time tidying up get messy again? He requested with a smile. Dumbledore nodded, smiling back. Of course. And please tell the Potters that I'm doing well and that I deeply appreciate their gifts. Also, remind them to stay safe and be cautious of Death Eaters, Anduin added. He was concerned that his presence might have altered the course of history. In the original timeline, the Potters' deaths might have occurred during the previous Christmas attack. He was particularly worried about Lily's safety. He had often expressed similar concerns while staying with Lily, but for the Potters, fighting the Dark Lord and facing danger was a part of life. He hoped that a reminder from Dumbledore might have a greater impact. Oh? Why do you think the Potters would be targeted by the Death Eaters? Dumbledore asked, raising an eyebrow and looking at Anduin thoughtfully. It's simple, Anduin replied. During the Christmas attack, some Death Eaters ignored the main battle and specifically targeted Lily and Alice. They even took the Madness Potion during the fight. If they had used that potion on the front lines, it could have turned the tide of the battle. This suggests that the Death Eaters were specifically after Lily or Alice. Dumbledore nodded in admiration. Then how do you know they weren't after someone else? Anduin was puzzled by the question. At the time, it was just me, Augusta, Lily, Alice, and their 2 children. If they were after me or Augusta, there wouldn't have been any need for such elaborate measures. And as for the children, there's no reason to target them. Dumbledore, impressed by Anduin's reasoning, despite his lack of insider knowledge, nodded again. Don't worry, I have considered this as well. They will be safe, I promise. Reassured by Dumbledore's words, Anduin bid him farewell and returned to his cabin in the Forbidden Forest. Very smart little wizard, wouldn't you say, Albus? He is indeed a student of Slytherin, remarked a portrait on the wall after Anduin had left. If Anduin had still been there, he would have recognized it as the painting that had glared at him earlier. Dumbledore nodded. Indeed, Phineas, but this Slytherin wizard is a Muggle-born. Phineas, the portrait, glared back. Impossible. Slytherin would never accept a Muggle-born wizard. You must be mistaken about his ancestry. Must have noble blood flowing. That's not necessarily true. I remember when I was in office, there was a Muggle-born wizard who entered Slytherin. It's rare, but not unheard of, one of the portraits interjected, separating itself from Phineas. Shut up, Dexter. I won't allow you to tarnish Slytherin's glory, Phineas roared, his eyes wide with anger. Dumbledore, still seated in his chair, listened to the former headmasters argue. He acted like a casual observer, reaching out to grab a handful of candy and slowly chewing it. Time passed, the ice and snow melted, and Hogwarts welcomed the arrival of spring. In addition to learning spells and runes, Anduin had another daily task, helping Hagrid cultivate the vegetable garden outside his hut. Anduin had asked Hagrid to buy a variety of vegetable seedlings, and together they planted them in the small garden. Hogwarts was approaching the Easter break, which would last for 2 weeks. Anduin had written to Sirius and Lily, asking if he could visit during the holiday. However, letters to the Potters had not been delivered recently, as if the owls couldn't find their location. Strangely, Anduin couldn't remember Lily's address either. Sirius responded promptly, but he seemed to be busy this Easter and advised Anduin not to visit his former residence, which was no longer safe. When Anduin inquired about Lily, Sirius assured him that her family had been placed in a secure location where no one could find them. This news relieved Anduin. Anduin realized that the Potter family might have been hidden by Dumbledore's magic, which would explain why he inexplicably forgot Lily's address. With this in mind, Anduin decided to stay at Hogwarts during Easter and not travel outside the school. Occlumency has been fully introduced. If I continue to practice, I will soon reach proficiency. The self-defense spells have also been trained to a proficient level. I can use the holiday to develop those research topics from the spell club, Anduin thought, planning his holiday activities. In the recent spell club meetings, Senior Quirrell's amplifying spell had progressed rapidly. It could clearly enhance the radio effect and broadcast in a fixed direction. However, as Anduin had anticipated, the spell was so lengthy that it was difficult to chant it all in one breath. Developing a spell that required pauses for breath was impractical. End of this chapter. Chapter 71. End of the period. Often, after a new spell is developed, it takes a long time to simplify it. Sometimes a practical spell will go through several years, even decades, or multiple generations of streamlining before it can be adapted for public use and widespread dissemination. Vanessa has also made some progress in her research on the extraction spell. The technique she developed to enhance the accuracy of casting spells, which Anduin calls accurate control, requires a strong sense of magic and control. Currently, only some senior students in the spell club can cast it successfully. Anduin felt that this spellcasting skill was of great value and could be applied to many other spells. His own floating spell, advanced to the transcendent domain, was not unrelated to his mastery of this skill. Anduin has already decided on his own research topic on magic spells, development ideas and application directions for sonic magic spells. He has already mastered all the earplugs, and the related runes are not complicated. He has included them here. The listening spell developed by Senior Quirrell is also a sonic spell, which can be used for reference. There are two research directions he tried. One is ultrasound, using its good directionality and high-frequency characteristics, and then imitating the characteristics of bats to develop a spell that can use echolocation. This spell would act like a directional radar, helping to identify the environment and search for enemies, even if they are using an illusion spell. The other direction is infrasound. Strong infrasound has strong lethality and penetration. When received by the human body, it can cause symptoms such as dizziness and nausea. If the intensity is high enough, it can even be fatal. This magic spell would be equivalent to developing a powerful AoE skill with interference and killing performance. Like Senior Quirrell, without the help of a rune disc, you can only draw runes on paper, combine them, and then translate the runes into spells to test their usefulness. Anduin has a strong advantage over Senior Quirrell in developing magic spells. He has a strong perception and control of magic power and experience in silent spellcasting, so he does not need to translate runes into spells to test them. Additionally, he has a rune disc, which greatly increases his efficiency. Therefore, Anduin hardly stayed at home during Easter. He spent his time analyzing the runes of sonic spells on the rune plate and sketching the rune formulas on parchment. At the same time, Anduin also began to take Buffy Brain Refresher regularly and in measured doses. The effect was very obvious. Anduin could clearly feel that his thinking speed had increased, and his memory and reaction abilities had gradually become stronger, greatly increasing his efficiency in magic learning and research. Anduin learned from many potion books that Buffy Brain Refresher is best taken when working with the brain. If taken normally, it will also have good results, but if the brain is not used regularly, the effect will gradually dissipate over time. Only by thinking and remembering during the taking period will the powerful gain effect still be maintained after the taking time has passed. This is a bit like protein powder. Usually, you will only gain weight inexplicably. If you don't eat, you will lose weight slowly. Only when you eat and exercise will you quickly turn into muscle. After the Christmas War in the magical world, there were no major battles, but there were constant small conflicts. Anduin could see from the Daily Prophet that the war had gradually turned white-hot. The time was gradually approaching the end of the term, and Anduin was also thinking about where to spend his vacation. For some reason, Sirius had been wandering around. It seemed that many Death Eaters had targeted him, while the Potters seemed to have disappeared. Anduin couldn't reach them at all. Could it be that I can only go back to the Leaky Cauldron during the summer vacation? However, given the current situation, Diagon Alley is not very safe. Anduin was very distressed about the arrangement of the summer vacation, and he planned to ask Professor McGonagall in a few days if he could stay on campus during the summer vacation. However, the arrival of a letter made him cancel this arrangement. It was a letter from Augusta Longbottom. Anduin clearly remembered this stern yet kind old lady. In the letter, Augusta invited Anduin to be a guest at the Longbottom family home and suggested that it would be better if he could stay with them for a while. Anduin thought it would be a good idea to spend the summer vacation at the Longbottom's house. Anduin wrote back to Mrs. Longbottom, thanking her for the invitation and expressing his happiness to spend the holiday with her. Augusta's reply was quick. She welcomed him warmly and provided her address. Since she had to take care of little Neville alone, and the Longbottoms needed to work at the Ministry of Magic, Anduin was required to go to the Longbottoms' house by himself. After deciding where to go for the holiday, Anduin began to prepare gifts for the visit. After all, it would be rude to arrive empty-handed. Anduin spent 50 gold galleons and asked Hagrid to buy him a whole warthog ham and 2 bottles of Ogden's aged fire whiskey. He also took out 4 bottles of Euphoria potion that he had left behind and wrapped them in a gift box, ready as a door-to-door gift. The boring time always passed quickly, and soon the second half of the school year was coming to an end. Anduin achieved 5 excellents and 2 goods in the 7 courses in the final exam. The 2 courses that did not reach excellent were the history of magic and astronomy. Anduin had basically kept up with the progress of these 2 courses, but most of his time was spent practicing spells and researching runes. After Anduin took a week to tutor Vivian, she finally passed all her courses, including the history of magic, which she had struggled with. Everyone has their own strengths, after all. The content of the exam in the Transfiguration class, as Professor McGonagall had revealed before, was to transform a mouse into a snuff box. Despite knowing the exam questions in advance, some students still failed, which Anduin found baffling. After the final exam, the day before the end of the semester, Hogwarts held a farewell party, which was the final dinner. At the dinner, Professor Dumbledore announced the winner of the House Cup for this academic year. Unsurprisingly, Ravenclaw successfully won the House Cup. Slytherin and Gryffindor had fought hard this school year, and the scores for both houses were almost at the bottom. Vanessa was very anxious about this, but given Slytherin's current situation, Anduin estimated that it was quite possible she wouldn't touch a single House Cup during her 7 years at school. In the Great Hall, adorned with blue flags, Anduin spent his first school year not very peacefully. End of this chapter. Chapter 72, Autry San Catchpole Village. After several hours of bumpy rides, Anduin got off the steam train, said goodbye to Vivian and Charles as usual, and then took out Augusta's letter to check it. Autry San Catchpole Village? Let's take the night bus, Anduin decided after looking at the address recorded in the letter. Walking out of the train station, Anduin found a quiet neighborhood and raised his wand. After a while, a purple 3-story bus stopped in front of him in a frantic manner. Anduin looked at the behemoth in front of him, guessing that the journey would not be too comfortable. In the village of Autry San Catchpole, Anduin, who had just gotten off the bus, swayed and found his balance after a long pause. The journey had been rough, with the bus almost rampaging and braking violently at every stop. Anduin admired the conductor for not getting sick. Following the address of the Longbottom family, Anduin quickly found the place. Anduin, I've been waiting for you. I haven't seen you since Christmas. Look at you. Your hair has grown long, Augusta said, wearing an apron and holding a spoon in one hand. She smiled as she looked at Anduin standing at the door. Anduin had not cut his hair all school year, and now it hung long over his shoulders. Except for the pure black color, it looked similar to Sirius's. It's me who should thank you for your invitation. Sirius and the Potters can't be contacted. If you hadn't taken them in, I would have had to deal with them at the Leaky Cauldron this summer, Anduin said sincerely. Look at what you said. You are not only our friend, but also our comrade in arms. Have you forgotten? You can accompany me this summer, and it won't be too boring. Don't just stand there. Come in. Augusta quickly pulled Anduin into the room. As soon as he entered, he smelled a strong aroma. Wait here for a while. Dinner will be ready soon. Frank and Alice will be back shortly. You can keep Neville company for me. I don't know if he still remembers you, Augusta said before quickly walking into the kitchen. Anduin, who smiled and nodded, stayed in the living room. The Longbottoms' house was decorated quite differently from the Potters'. While the Potters' house was warm and simple, the Longbottoms' house had a more aged feel. The surrounding wooden furniture was thick and sturdy, looking like it had been passed down for several generations. The carpets and decorations had an obvious aristocratic style. Landscapes and portraits adorned the walls, and antique-like utensils were placed in the living room. There were also small animal specimens in the display cabinet and a hat with precious decoration on the hat rack, with a vulture specimen perched on it. What peculiar taste, Anduin thought. It was definitely not Alice's style. In a crib by the fireplace in the hall, Neville lay bored. Suddenly, the face of a long-haired man came into his view. Startled, Neville was about to cry, but then found the face somewhat familiar. He stopped crying and stared at Anduin with big round eyes. Anduin saw that Neville was about to cry when he saw him, and he was a little curious and fearful. He couldn't help but find it amusing. So he showed a happy smile, squeezed Neville's little hand lightly, and said, "Little Neville, do you still remember me? We once fought off the Death Eaters together." Neville, who was just curious at first, was frightened by Anduin's teasing and burst into tears, causing Anduin to freeze in embarrassment. "Okay, I won't tease you. Why are you crying?" Anduin said helplessly. Neville's cry alarmed Augusta in the kitchen, and the old woman made a special trip to look out from the inside to check. Seeing that Anduin was handling it, she returned to her cooking. Neville was all right. She had coaxed little Neville with Anduin before returning to the kitchen to continue her work. Anduin, meanwhile, waited and watched Neville, not daring to touch him for fear of making him cry again. After a while, the doorbell rang, and the Longbottoms returned. Frank and Alice, upon entering, saw Anduin standing next to Neville and greeted him warmly. "Anduin, it's been a long time. My mother mentioned you would come to our house for the holidays, but I didn't believe it at first. It's great that you're here. Alice and I are busy every day, and now someone can keep my mom company and save us from her daily nagging," Frank said, stretching and greeting Anduin excitedly, as if he were a savior. "Hello, Frank. Alice. Mrs. Longbottom has been very kind to me, and I am grateful for your invitation," Anduin replied politely. "Humph, I think I heard someone speaking ill of me just now. Dinner is ready. What are you all doing here?" Augusta said sternly as she entered the room. Okay, I know I'm wrong, Mom, but don't you think we have guests here?" Frank apologized to his mother upon hearing her voice, then turned back to Anduin and stuck his tongue out playfully. Anduin found the family very interesting. Augusta was a serious mother, but he could feel her deep love for her family. The aroma of dinner alone was enough to tell him it was going to be a great meal. Only with love can one create truly delicious food. Anduin enjoyed his first meal of the summer vacation at the Longbottoms' house. The dinner was very rich, and seeing how comfortable Frank and Alice were, it seemed this was a daily occurrence. Augusta ate quickly and then busied herself feeding little Neville, showing her deep interest in her grandson. After dinner, Anduin took out the prepared gift from his space bag. The Longbottom family was initially hesitant, but at Anduin's insistence, Augusta accepted it. She hurriedly took the thick ham to the storage room. Frank, smiling, opened a bottle of Ogden's aged fire whiskey, poured himself a small glass, and secretly tasted it in the living room. Anduin found it amusing, watching Frank act like a child afraid of being caught stealing alcohol. Back in the living room, Alice held little Neville while Frank sipped his wine and chatted happily with Anduin. "So, how was your first year at Hogwarts? Did Professor McGonagall catch you often? I remember she always liked to trouble us and put us in detention," Frank said, reminiscing. End of this chapter. Chapter 73. The Longbottom Family. Anduin smiled and said, "Professor McGonagall takes good care of me, but those Gryffindors and Slytherins who constantly bicker often make the professors angry. It must be those damn Slytherins who are stirring things up." Frank suddenly realized that Anduin was also in Slytherin and quickly added, "I mean those who always brag about pure-blood supremacy. Many Slytherins are quite well behaved." Anduin didn't mind and said, "I agree with you. A few pure-blooded students tried to cause trouble for me before, but I dealt with them." Frank said excitedly, "Then you should learn from Sirius and James. They used to use the levicorpus spell to hang people upside down. It was quite entertaining when they were in school. Anduin thought to himself, I'm not that naive. It's better to deal with enemies efficiently. He then asked, speaking of Sirius, has he run into trouble? I haven't been able to contact him, or Lily and James. The letters I send with my owl never reach them. Alice and Frank exchanged worried glances. Alice said, Dumbledore believes Lily and James are in danger, so they've gone into hiding. It's normal that you can't find them. We can't contact them either. As for Sirius, Frank continued, he's also in hiding. Many Death Eaters are trying to find Lily and James through him. But don't worry, he's not fighting alone. Anduin nodded, realizing it was as he had suspected. All right, it's getting late. You should rest now, Augusta said as she entered the living room after tidying up the dining room and kitchen. Frank, take Anduin to the guest room at the end of the corridor. I've already prepared it. Anduin, you're too polite. I don't think I can finish that ham in a month. After speaking, she sniffed the air and said angrily, Frank, have you been drinking again? You know you have work tomorrow. Frank shrank back, smiling sheepishly, and quickly led Anduin upstairs. Alice, holding Neville, snickered, while Augusta glared at her in mock anger. Anduin settled into the Longbottom household, maintaining his disciplined lifestyle. He exercised regularly, studied runes, and practiced occlumency. During the day, he helped Augusta with household chores. Despite her stern demeanor, Augusta grew fond of Anduin, appreciating his sensible and disciplined nature, not to mention his cooking skills. The Longbottoms, both Aurors for the Ministry of Magic, were often busy with work, especially during the war. Anduin's presence was a comfort to the lonely Augusta. Anduin, Frank and Alice have a day off tomorrow. I'm planning to invite the neighbors over and serve the ham you gave us. Do you have any good recipes for cooking ham? Augusta asked while preparing lunch with Anduin. Anduin, who had been living with the Longbottoms for 2 weeks, had impressed Augusta with his culinary skills. It depends on how many people there are. If it's a small group, I can make some delicate dishes, like boiled cabbage. I can also slice the ham and serve it with a salad. This time, I'm inviting more people. The Weasleys who live outside the village will be coming. Arthur is Frank's colleague, and his wife Molly is the sister of. Augusta clasped her fingers and began listing names. The Prewett brothers, so many kids, and Molly is still pregnant. It's hard to imagine how she manages to take care of so many people. Then there's the Diggory family, who also work at the Ministry of Magic, and Xenophilius Lovegood, the editor of the Quibbler. The Good family, too, though that guy is a bit odd. It would be rude not to invite them as neighbors. As Augusta counted, Anduin listened carefully. When he realized the number of people involved, especially the children, he said, Understood. So, there are 6 adults and 8 children, right? 2 of the children are infants, and the remaining 6 are under 10 years old, plus 1 is pregnant. Anduin considered the group and then took out a piece of parchment. He began writing the menu neatly, saying, Since we have pregnant women and children, we should avoid dishes with alcohol. Children generally prefer fried and sweet dishes. Let's do some braised pork, sweet and sour pork loin, fried chicken wings, and fried squid rings. As he wrote, he continued, For the ham, I'll cut it into small pieces and add shrimp, scallops, peas, fresh bamboo shoots, and eggs to make fried rice. This can be a self-service staple food, which is more convenient. We'll also prepare some cold dishes. Dry-cut ham with salad and cheese, lean ham with corn to make ham and corn soup, and chicken stew with dried mushrooms. We can use the lamb chops in your storage room to make grilled lamb chops with chopped pistachios. I'll mix some sauces and prepare cucumbers, kelp, and fungus for cold dishes. We'll also have some desserts and bread in case someone doesn't like rice. We can set up a long table in the yard for a buffet-style meal, which is more suitable for occasions with many children and saves time. What do you think? Augusta was surprised to see how quickly Anduin had prepared the menu and planned the banquet. She had only wanted his advice on cooking ham, but he had taken care of everything. You are very thoughtful. Let's do as you suggested. I'm suddenly looking forward to tomorrow's luncheon very much, Augusta said, her mouth almost watering at the thought of the delicious dishes Anduin had described. End of this chapter. Chapter 74. The Bear Children. After confirming the menu, Anduin and Augusta began preparing the materials in the afternoon. Augusta brought out some exquisite ceramic tableware and large silver-plated utensils for the buffet. Early the next morning, they started preparing the ingredients. Augusta used cooking magic to mix the dough and was responsible for making the bread, desserts, and juice drinks for the luncheon. Anduin managed 3 chopping boards simultaneously, processing pork, chicken, lamb chops, and ham. He categorized all the meat, vegetables, seasonings, and other ingredients for quick access later. Frank and Alice took a rare vacation and were excited about the banquet. They helped set up tables, chairs, and dining tables in the yard, casting muggle-repelling and shielding charms around the area. Although many wizards lived in the village, there were also many muggles, and they didn't want to be disturbed. As Anduin turned on the 4-eye stove to prioritize dishes that took a lot of time, such as chicken stewed with mushrooms and braised pork, the first guests arrived. The Diggory family, Amos Diggory, his wife, and their 4-year-old son Cedric, were the first to arrive. Anduin heard the conversation in the living room and peeked out from the kitchen. The Diggory couple looked like an ordinary pair, slightly plump. Cedric stayed close to his parents but looked around curiously. When he saw Anduin, his shy little face flushed and he smiled. Anduin returned the smile and went back to work in the kitchen. The aroma of the simmering dishes filled the kitchen, and Anduin began cooking several fried dishes, such as sweet and sour pork loin, fried chicken wings, and onion rings. At this time, the second wave of guests, the Longbottom family, arrived. The living room suddenly became noisy, filled with the shouts and laughter of children. Anduin guessed it was the Weasley family, but was too busy frying to check. Unexpectedly, 2 twin children, about 3 or 4 years old with fiery red hair, burst into the kitchen, yelling as they ran. Anduin, who couldn't stand the chaos, was concerned about the hot oil splashing on the children, but the 2 bear children seemed oblivious and ran straight toward him. "Ah, it smells so good, George! Do you smell it?" one of them exclaimed. "You're George and I'm Fred, idiot," the other corrected. The twins ran to Anduin's feet, trying to see the stove's contents. "Don't stay here. It will burn you. You'll get to taste the delicious food after dinner," Anduin said, trying to shoo them away. "I don't want to. You're just a little taller than my eldest brother. Why should I listen to you?" One of the twins said defiantly. "That's right, unless you lift me up to see what's so fragrant." "It's more fragrant than the food made by our mother," the other added. "You're talking nonsense. No one cooks better than our mother." "Your nose must be broken," the first twin retorted. "Your nose is broken. Not only is your nose broken, but your ears are broken too," the second twin shot back. Before Anduin could intervene, the 2 children started quarreling and looked ready to fight. Just as Anduin was about to lose his patience, another child walked in. He had the same red hair and looked 2 or 3 years older than the twins. He seemed more gentle and composed. "George, Fred, Mom told you to get out and stop disturbing everyone here," their older brother reprimanded. When Anduin saw that someone had finally come to his rescue, he sighed in relief. Thank God. "Just a little bit," the 2 mischievous children shouted in unison, sticking out their tongues at their brother. "No, Percy the crybaby, come after us!" The twins ignored their brother and began circling around the marble counter in the middle of the kitchen. Percy, infuriated by their antics, chased after them. Anduin, watching from the side, felt his anger rising as the little devils continued to disregard him. Just as he was about to lose his temper, another person entered the kitchen. This newcomer appeared much elder than the 3 children, likely around 10 years old. He also had fiery red hair but seemed far more composed. Seeing his elder brother, Percy quickly complained, "Bill, look at them. They're not listening at all, and they're making fun of me." "Nonsense, you started it. Percy always tattles," the twins retorted in unison. Bill, who had just entered, took swift steps towards the twins, picked them up, and without addressing them, turned to Anduin with an apologetic expression. "Sorry, my brothers disturbed you." Anduin, relieved that someone had come to handle the situation, replied, "It's nothing, but the kitchen is very dangerous. It's better not to let them run around here. They could easily get hurt." Bill nodded apologetically to Anduin, then glanced sternly at George and Fred, before dragging them out despite their protests. Finally, the kitchen was quiet again, and Anduin felt a sense of relief. He now had a glimpse of how chaotic a large family could be. These children had such varied personalities, and he truly admired the Weasleys for managing such a big family. With peace restored, Anduin focused on finishing the cooking. Augusta, who had been out entertaining guests, returned to the kitchen to check on the desserts in the oven. At this moment, the last wave of guests finally arrived. Anduin, who was nearly done with his tasks, walked to the kitchen door to see the guests Augusta had described as the peculiar Lovegood family. Mr. Xenophilius Lovegood looked very artistic, with shaggy white hair draped over his shoulders, a bright yellow robe, and a gold chain around his neck with a triangular pendant. Mrs. Lovegood, holding a baby, wore a light blue robe and had a scholarly air about her. End of this chapter. Chapter 75, Luncheon. At first glance, these two are definitely Ravenclaws. Anduin thought silently. No wonder Augusta has such an opinion. Ravenclaws sometimes come across as a bit eccentric, and some even call them weird. Anduin had a good impression of the two. After all, he had once thought he might be sorted into Ravenclaw himself, given his scholarly demeanor. The Longbottoms continued chatting with everyone and invited them to the courtyard to relax. The weather was splendid that day, with rare sunshine. Everyone sipped drinks in the courtyard, engaging in lively conversations about various topics of interest. A group of children played together, creating a joyful scene. In the kitchen, Anduin wiped the sweat from his brow, having finally prepared all the food. Using magic, he transferred the dishes into large porcelain servingware. The tableware floated in an orderly line, following Anduin to the courtyard. He carefully placed the dishes onto the dining table, closing the lids one by one. Everything was ready. Augusta, seated at the long dining table, tapped her glass and announced, "Welcome to the Longbottoms' luncheon. A special thanks to Anduin for preparing such a delicious feast. Now, let's enjoy our meal together. Don't be shy. Help yourselves to whatever you like." Summarizing Augusta's words, Anduin thought, "Eat well, drink well, and enjoy yourselves." Augusta's announcement brought the family gathering to a peak. The children rushed to the dining table, their excitement palpable. Anduin couldn't help but smile at the sight of the red-haired little devils. A pregnant woman approached Anduin and said, "Anduin, I've heard my two older brothers mention you, but I didn't expect you to be such a good cook. The aroma from the kitchen was delightful as soon as I walked in." "Thank you, Mrs. Weasley. I must say, it's impressive how you manage such a large family," Anduin replied politely. "Please, call me Molly. You have no idea how much work it takes to cook for so many people every day," Molly Weasley said. Arthur Weasley, holding a child about Neville's age, chimed in. "Anduin, although this is our first meeting, I've heard about you from Moody and Kingsley. They mentioned you helped fend off the Death Eaters. Is that true?" The couple's concerns were entirely different, and Anduin found himself juggling their questions, feeling a bit overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the children finished their meals and slowly returned to the long table with their plates. Anduin suggested to the Weasleys, "Why don't you two get something to eat first? We can chat while we eat." The Weasleys agreed readily. Arthur entrusted Anduin with their more than 1-year-old son, Ron, and happily selected food while patting his stomach. Anduin held little Ron, who looked well-nourished and healthy. The guests at the Longbottoms' house sat around the long table, happily savoring the food on their plates. The Diggorys were cheerful as always, while the Lovegoods were a bit reserved and not very sociable. The Weasley family was lively, with Arthur enjoying the food with a smile. Molly juggled eating and taking care of the children, though her eldest son, Bill, and second son, Charlie, were able to help her out a bit. The twins, however, were restless. One thing all the guests had in common was their amazement at the food. Even the children, including the shy Cedric, were delighted. After learning that almost all the food was prepared by Anduin, everyone showered him with praise. "So, how did you make this chicken and mushroom soup? It smells divine and tastes even better," Molly asked, amazed by Anduin's culinary skills. She had never experienced such a delightful meal before. There was no overpowering smell of cheese or butter, so she kept asking Anduin about the recipe. Anduin humbly shared his cooking skills with Mrs. Weasley. Before long, Molly and Anduin were chatting like old friends. "Brother Anduin, Can you come to our house often? When you visit, you can cook for us too, said 8-year-old Charlie Weasley, holding a chick, and wing in both hands and speaking shyly. Of course, as long as you don't mind, Anduin replied calmly. Really, our family would be very happy to have you, Arthur Weasley said excitedly from the side. And so, Anduin and the Weasleys forged a friendship over food. The luncheon was a scene of guests thoroughly enjoying themselves. After lunch, everyone gathered for afternoon tea, and the children played in the courtyard. Mr. Lovegood approached Anduin and said, "Young man, thank you for your hospitality. My wife is very happy today. Even Luna can feel her mother's joy, and she's been laughing all day." Anduin smiled and replied, "You're too kind, Mr. Lovegood. I'm glad you all enjoyed the food." "We all loved it, and Luna did too. Although she can't eat it yet, you can tell she likes it," Lovegood said. Though Anduin wasn't sure how he came to that conclusion, he politely responded, "I'm glad your daughter likes it. I heard you're the editor of a magazine. That must be very hard work." Lovegood's eyes lit up at Anduin's words. "Yes, have you heard of the Quibbler? It's the only magazine willing to publish articles about the crumple-horned snorkack, the blibbering humdinger, and other creatures. Other magazines just hide the truth. They're run by a bunch of crooks." Anduin was taken aback by Mr. Lovegood's bluntness, but found his straightforwardness somewhat endearing. "May you not be troubled by those who don't understand," Anduin said diplomatically. "Pandora is calling me, so please excuse me for a moment. Perhaps one day you could publish some recipes in our magazine. I believe they would be very popular," Lovegood added with a smile before getting up to leave. Anduin didn't fully grasp everything Mr. Lovegood said, but he could tell that he was a good person, albeit with a unique way of thinking. End of this chapter. Chapter 76, Touring Striker. After communicating with the visiting neighbors and friends, Anduin began to form impressions of these wizarding acquaintances. Mr. Lovegood had some eccentric ideas, but was incredibly innocent and kind-hearted. Mrs. Lovegood was a spell scholar who had attempted to research and develop new spells. The Diggory family was dutiful and behaved like the ideal good-natured couple next door. The Weasleys invited Anduin to visit their home before school started. Molly Weasley thought Anduin was a good match for her children, and the Prewett brothers also had their reasons. However, Anduin believed the main reason was their family's genuine hospitality. Mr. Weasley, in particular, was fascinated by Anduin being a Muggle-born wizard. His curiosity about the Muggle world was extraordinary, likely influenced by his work in the Office of the Prohibition of Misuse of Muggle Artifacts. His department dealt with wizards casting spells on Muggle objects indiscriminately, but Anduin suspected Mr. Weasley might have been using his position to experiment with spells himself. The joyful party eventually came to an end, and the guests bid farewell to the Longbottom family and Anduin with contentment. The Longbottoms were also very pleased with the holiday, their faces beaming with smiles. Even old Mrs. Longbottom felt proud and constantly praised Anduin for his excellent craftsmanship. After their vacation, the Longbottoms resumed their intense Auror duties. Recently, the Death Eaters had become increasingly active, committing acts of torture and murder against Muggles and launching sneak attacks on wizards and Aurors. These incidents were happening one after another, leaving the Auror Command feeling overwhelmed. Anduin didn't fully understand the Auror's work. Their main job was to patrol various wizarding locations, including Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, and Ottery St. Catchpole, where Anduin lived. However, there was no corresponding alarm feedback system. If a wizard was attacked, they could only passively wait for rescue, resist, or flee. Many wizards were attacked, and the Aurors often arrived too late. Their tracking methods were also limited, relying mainly on reports or information gathered through visits. In his spare time, Anduin discussed the Auror's work with the Longbottoms. They explained that the Ministry of Magic had a powerful detection array covering the entire United Kingdom. The Aurors were divided into two groups. One patrolled while the other remained on standby at headquarters. This setup was meant to protect the headquarters and maintain mobility. However, there was a delay in the detection of the magic circle, making it difficult to identify specific individuals. For instance, if Anduin cast spells at the Longbottom's house, the Ministry of Magic couldn't determine who cast the spells. Although the entire UK was covered by the detection array, many people cast spells daily, and the Ministry had to monitor traces to prevent underage wizards from casting spells. Only when there was a high-energy reaction or fluctuations from the unforgivable curses would the mobile troops respond. Some Death Eaters attacked wizards with low spellcasting strength, causing the Ministry of Magic to miss these incidents. They would only learn about the attacks when the escaped or injured wizards reported them. The Ministry of Magic was increasing its monitoring efforts. If spells were cast more frequently, Aurors would investigate. Their training speed was not fast, relying mainly on the advanced application of the Patronus charm to quickly locate wizards and pass information. However, the situation remained challenging. Many people, even Aurors, are unaware of this high-level skill. Therefore, a more effective method is to use apparition for interrogation. This leads to the main reason for the war: intelligence. The Ministry of Magic itself has the power to support the Dark Lord, often passing Auror information to the Death Eaters. This has resulted in the current situation where the Ministry is a sentient ally compromised, with the enemy operating in the shadows while we are exposed. This is why the Order of the Phoenix was established. It is no wonder that so many Aurors have joined the Order. In such a compromised situation, it is indeed necessary to establish an organization that operates outside the Ministry's purview to resist the Dark Lord. However, this does not eliminate the inefficiencies of both the Aurors and the Order of the Phoenix. It is akin to a feudal society where a case can only be dealt with after the fact, and the murderer is caught, despite having many convenient and efficient supernatural means at their disposal. The Death Eaters can use the Dark Mark for simple communication, and the Dark Lord can use it to summon or give orders to them. In contrast, the Aurors have very few means of communication and warning. If all wizards had an alarm device or charm, they could quickly notify the Auror office if attacked, greatly reducing the number of attacks and ensuring more timely support. Anduin also learned about the strike force within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. They have higher authority than ordinary Aurors and undertake more dangerous tasks, often fighting crime on the front lines. Some members of the strike force are also Aurors, but not all Aurors are part of this force. For example, Mad-Eye Moody is the captain of a strike squad and is also responsible for Auror duties. In Anduin's view, Aurors are like ordinary policemen, while the strike force is more akin to an armed police unit. However, these wizards lack battlefield experience, and their combat literacy needs improvement. Their battles are often chaotic, with little to no cooperation. Additionally, Anduin learned about a role called Cruising Hitman. This is not an official job at the Ministry of Magic, but is more like a bounty hunter. They do not receive a salary, but can earn bounties by capturing dark or criminal wizards and submitting them to the Ministry of Magic. For such bounty wizards, the Ministry issues a symbolic Cruising Hitter's certificate. However, this certificate does not grant any official authority. Its only use is to allow bounty arrests abroad, recognized by foreign ministries of magic, which then pay the bounty. However, these cruising hitmen can be arrested if they violate local laws. This life-threatening business is now almost obsolete, but it is very convenient to apply for and can even be done part-time. Frank mentioned that Sirius once applied for this certificate, thinking it was cool, but soon discarded it, describing the profession as a waste of paper from the Ministry of Magic. Even without being a cruising hitman, one can still receive bounties from the Ministry after capturing a dark wizard. End of this chapter. Chapter 77, The Burrow. Anduin was very interested in this. In his plan, after graduating from Hogwarts, he wanted to explore the world, possibly embarking on a magical journey around the globe. If he could obtain such a certificate, he could also earn some extra money by dealing with dark wizards in other countries. Therefore, Anduin asked Frank about the application process for this identity and found that obtaining the certificate was quite straightforward. As long as an application was submitted to the International Magic Cooperation Department and the applicant had no criminal record, the certificate could be successfully issued. The reason for applying to the Department of International Magical Cooperation instead of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was that this profession first emerged from the Magic Congress of the United States. The Wizarding International also recognized this profession, allowing it to spread to various countries. After all, it helped the Ministry of Magic in different countries alleviate the pressure of crime. However, if any local area was damaged during the pursuit, the individual would be arrested and repatriated by the respective Ministry of Magic. After learning about the inner workings of the Ministry of Magic and the Aurors, Anduin became very concerned about the current situation. The information between the two sides was completely unequal. If the world was not like his vague memories from his previous life, where the Dark Lord attacked Harry and was defeated, there was a risk of falling into the quagmire of a protracted war. Anduin didn't know if Dumbledore's protection of the Lily family would change history, but if it did, the magical world might not be very peaceful for a long time. This kind of insecure life was not what Anduin wanted. If he wanted to change everything, he could only become stronger, and he was determined to go all out to achieve that. Therefore, in the following days, his spirit was tense again. He focused on spell development, spell practice, occlumency training, and daily exercise. The sense of urgency related to safety made Anduin unable to relax at all. Augusta didn't know what was happening with Anduin, except for the times he would go downstairs to help with cooking and assist Augusta with the children when she went out. He spent the rest of his time cooped up in his room. This kind of life continued for over a month. On August 8, 1981, while Anduin was helping to cook, Augusta brought him a message. "The invitation from the Weasleys? I'm sorry, I almost forgot," Anduin said. He had been a little tense recently, and his spell development had reached a critical moment, so he had forgotten about it. Augusta smiled and said, "Yes, I happened to meet Molly yesterday, and she also expects you to teach her some recipes. She will be giving birth soon, and many fruits in their orchard are ripe. She wants to invite us over as guests. Although I don't know why you are so busy every day, a balance between work and rest is best." Anduin nodded, realizing he had been pushing himself too hard recently. The unknown danger made him a little nervous, and it was necessary to relax properly. So he nodded and said, "Okay, then let's visit the Weasleys tomorrow." The next day, Anduin, holding little Neville, accompanied Augusta to the burrow where the Weasleys lived, on the outskirts of the village of Ottery St. Catchpole. The Weasleys had cast a wide range of Muggle-repelling charms and shielding charms to prevent being disturbed by Muggles. As they approached the destination, Anduin saw from a distance a house that looked like it was made of building blocks. It was as high as several floors. In a Muggle society, such a house could not be built at all. "You see, that's the burrow where the Weasleys live," Augusta pointed out. There was a small yard in front of the burrow, which looked like a chicken coop. Additionally, there was a warehouse resembling a garage outside. Surrounded by beautiful scenery, it was a good place to live. Anduin and Augusta continued towards the burrow, ready to enjoy their visit. As they approached the burrow, the Weasleys spotted them. A few of the younger children poked their heads out of the upper windows, waving excitedly. Arthur Weasley, having heard the commotion, opened the front door to welcome their guests. "Ha ha! If you didn't come as guests, Molly would have to give birth. We wouldn't have time to entertain you then." Arthur greeted them with a hearty laugh. Anduin replied apologetically, "Sorry, it's my fault. I've been so engrossed in my studies and research lately that I forgot about everything else." "You're so motivated at such a young age. If only my children were like you. Come in quickly. Molly has been busy in the kitchen since early this morning," Arthur said with a cheerful expression. Arthur ushered them into the house, chatting all the while. "Bill will be 11 years old after his birthday in November this year. It's a pity he can't start at Hogwarts this year. He'll have to wait another year. The fruit this year is excellent. The grapes and plums are especially sweet. You must try some." Anduin and Augusta followed Arthur to the living room and sat down, sampling the fruits that had been prepared. The children soon came downstairs, gathering around the guests. Bill, the eldest, was holding his youngest brother, Ron, and helping out sensibly. Molly, busy in the kitchen, heard the commotion and came out to greet them. She then eagerly pulled Anduin into the kitchen, wanting to learn a few recipes from him. Anduin, fond of this hard-working mother, enthusiastically shared some of his favorite recipes. Despite her large belly, Molly was adept at using cooking magic, and together they prepared several dishes. In a household with many children, chaos is inevitable. While Molly focused on cooking, she still managed to yell at the naughty children outside. Each time she roared, the noise from the living room would momentarily cease, only to resume shortly after with the sound of something crashing or a child crying. Molly's next roar would instantly silence the room again. Anduin was amazed at how she could identify the troublemakers without even looking. In this warm, chaotic, yet harmonious family atmosphere, Anduin and Molly prepared lunch for everyone. The dining room soon became a scene of lively chaos. The 3-year-old twins, Fred and George, were the most mischievous, often grabbing food from their brothers Percy or Charlie and scaring Ron, who was in Bill's arms, to the point of tears. Molly and Bill worked tirelessly to maintain order, while Arthur watched with a smile. Anduin felt that this family was truly lively, and the family atmosphere was incredibly strong. Since arriving in this world, it was the first time Anduin had experienced the warmth of a big family, which made him involuntarily fall into a nostalgic reverie. End of this chapter. Chapter 78. Bad News. Molly noticed that Anduin seemed distracted after taking a few bites and asked with concern, "What's wrong, Anduin? Is the food not to your liking?" "No, it's not that," Anduin replied, snapping out of his reverie. "I just envy your family. It reminds me of some past events." "Oh, Merlin's beard, if these little mischiefs can save me someday, I'll be thankful," Molly said, distressed. She then turned to Arthur, who was focused on his meal, and scolded, "And you don't even help me manage them." Arthur shrugged innocently, gave Molly a reassuring smile, and continued eating happily. The noisy lunch soon came to an end. All the children were messy from eating, and Anduin kindly used a cleaning spell to remove the stains from their bodies, as if helping them wash their hands one by one. "Your spells are impressive. I remember when I was your age, I couldn't use a cleaning spell so smoothly," Arthur praised Anduin. "As long as you practice hard, it's not as complicated as you think," Anduin laughed. After lunch, Anduin and Augusta joined the Weasleys for fruit and tea, chatting and listening to the Witcher radio simulcast. It was a very popular radio station in the wizarding world, currently broadcasting the Witcher Radio News Network. The children, however, were not interested in the news. They preferred the Toots Sprouting Show and the Magic Time music program, so they went outside to play in the yard. Wizard Radio News has an urgent report for you. Just now, there was a violent explosion in the northern part of Cornwall. The Ministry of Magic suspects that Death Eaters were active in the area. The Ministry of Magic Auror Strike Team has gone to investigate. All wizards in the area are advised to stay safe. Please wait for further reports on the damage and casualties. The bad news from the Magic Radio cast a shadow over the Weasleys' house. "Damn, these Death Eaters are getting more and more rampant," Arthur said, frowning at the news broadcast. "This kind of news has been increasing lately. I hope the people there are safe. I remember Marlene McKinnon and her fiancé live nearby. I hope they are not affected," Augusta said worriedly. Anduin also frowned with concern. An attack in that area was troubling. Although he had already sent someone, it was likely too late. As he had analyzed before, the official response speed was too slow. Now, they could only wait quietly for further news. They listened to the news for a while in the living room, but there was no follow-up broadcast with details of the scene. Suddenly, a Patronus blazing with white light appeared through the walls of the burrow. It was a small ermine, which Anduin recognized as Frank's Patronus. The ermine stopped in front of Augusta, and a voice emerged from the light and shadow of the Patronus. "Mom, there has been a murder here in Cornwall. The Marlene McKinnon family has been killed." A few miles away, the Prewett brothers who came to support were also ambushed and killed by the Death Eaters. The bodies are now 3 miles north of Marlene's house. "Moody thinks it is necessary to notify you first and then help inform the Weasleys. We know Mrs. Weasley is about to give birth, so you should consider whether to tell her the bad news." As soon as Anduin heard the news from the Patronus, he stood up abruptly. Arthur also sat frozen in shock. They exchanged solemn glances, then suddenly heard the sound of porcelain shattering behind them. They turned to see Molly, pale-faced and trembling, unable to hold anything. She looked deeply shaken, on the verge of collapsing. Seeing this, Anduin rushed over to support her. Arthur also hurried to help, and together they guided Molly to sit on the sofa. The air in the house grew heavy with tension. The atmosphere was heavy and suffocating. Anduin, Augusta, and Arthur were at a loss for words, their grief palpable as they looked down at Molly. Anduin poured a glass of water and handed it to her. Molly's eyes finally focused, and with trembling hands she took the glass, tears streaming down her face. Arthur, seeing Molly's silent but intense sorrow, gently caressed her back, unable to find the right words to comfort her. After a moment, Molly looked up at her husband and said, "Arthur, please go see them for me, my two poor brothers." Her voice broke, and she began to sob uncontrollably. The children playing outside heard their mother's cries and rushed in, bewildered and concerned. Arthur nodded to Molly, then turned to Augusta. "Mrs. Longbottom, please take care of Molly. She needs you. I have to go to the scene of the incident to confirm what happened." He then looked at Bill and said, "Take care of your brothers and your mother. I'll be back as soon as I can." Anduin stepped forward. "Mr. Weasley, let me go with you. They are my friends too." Arthur hesitated. "It's not yet determined whether it's safe. It could be too dangerous." Anduin insisted. "I can protect myself. We should go together and look out for each other." Augusta added, "Let Anduin accompany you. He is a very capable young man and can help you come up with ideas if needed." Seeing their determination, Arthur nodded. "All right, thank you. I appreciate your help." He then turned to Augusta and said, "Please try to inform the Diggory family and ask them to come here to help. If you need to reach me urgently, use the Patronus charm to send a message." Augusta nodded in agreement. Despite Anduin being just a child, she found him more reliable than many adult wizards. With the decision made, Arthur took Anduin outside the house. "I've been to Marlene's house before. We'll apparate directly to the scene. Grab my hand." Anduin did as instructed, and in an instant, they disappeared. They reappeared in the northern part of Cornwall, in front of a suburban house that was almost completely destroyed. Several aurors were patrolling the area, and two bodies wrapped in white cloth lay on the ground outside. Frank and Alice stood nearby, their expressions solemn as they guarded the scene. End of this chapter. Chapter 79. The Aftermath. Arthur and Anduin apparated not far from the scene. The aurors on guard instinctively pointed their wands at the newcomers, but quickly relaxed upon recognizing them. Frank and Alice hurried over to meet them. "You're here," Frank said. "This is Marlene and her fiancé. The Prewett brothers are in the woods further north, and Moody is there controlling the scene. I'll take you to them." Anduin glanced at the two bodies wrapped on the ground and the shattered house nearby, imagining the fierce battle that had taken place. Alice, looking equally somber, turned to Arthur. "How's Molly? Have you told her the news? Frank and I were torn when we arrived. We didn't know if we should inform you immediately." Arthur sighed. "Thank you for everything. We were with Mrs. Longbottom when Molly heard the news. Augusta is helping take care of her now. Anduin and I came here first. It's not convenient for her at the moment." Alice exchanged a sorrowful look with her husband, imagining Molly's grief. "Frank, take Arthur over there. I need to wait for the McKinnon family here." Frank nodded, then grabbed Arthur's hand. Arthur, in turn, held on to Anduin, and the three apparated away together. In a grove just north of Marlene McKinnon's farmhouse, more aurors were on alert. Moody and Barty Crouch, head of the Magical Law Enforcement Department, were surveying the scene. Gideon and Fabian Prewett lay covered with white cloths. Frank, Arthur, and Anduin arrived and nodded to Moody and the others. Anduin observed the battle's aftermath. The trees and ground bore the scars of a fierce fight. The traces extended south, suggesting the Prewett brothers had been chased from Marlene's house. It seemed they had either arrived to support the McKinnon family or had been ambushed shortly after the family was killed. Arthur stepped forward with a heavy heart, lifting the white cloth to reveal Gideon's pale, dust-covered face, marred by numerous scars. Barty Crouch, equally saddened, spoke up. "I'm sorry, Arthur. This is a tragic loss. Gideon and Fabian are heroes of this war. I hope you can find some solace." Arthur, tears streaming down his face, shook his head. They are our pride. It's those damn Death Eaters who caused this. They will always live in our hearts." Anduin solemnly regarded the bodies of the 2 Order of the Phoenix members. They had suffered greatly, and the battle had lasted at least half an hour. If they had managed to send a warning, this might have been prevented. Arthur, with the help of the Aurors, prepared the bodies of his brothers. He then asked for an account of what had happened. Moody recounted the day's tragic events. Around noon, a group of Death Eaters attacked the Marlene McKinnon family. The McKinnons had resisted and managed to alert the Prewett brothers. They had spent Christmas together last year, and the Prewetts had given Marlene a double-sided mirror as a gift. After the fight, the Prewett brothers and Marlene arrived together to support the Potter family. Through a double-sided mirror, the Prewett brothers learned of the crisis in the Marlene family. Unfortunately, they made a mistake by not alerting the other members of the Order of the Phoenix, and instead went directly to provide support. Moody's speculation about the Marlene family's situation was unclear at that time. It was possible that the Marlene family had already been killed or were still resisting. In any case, the situation did not improve after the Prewett brothers arrived. They stubbornly resisted the attack but were outnumbered and had to retreat to the north. Fabian noticed a slight split, indicating that they tried to apparate to escape but were interrupted. Eventually, they were overtaken and executed by several Death Eaters. The Ministry of Magic did not detect any abnormalities until about 10 minutes after Marlene's house was attacked. Although they arrived in time, it was too late to provide support, and the Death Eaters had already fled. After understanding the general process of the events, Arthur nodded with a heavy expression. He restrained the corpses and prepared them for burial. At that moment, a woman dressed as an Auror apparated into the crowd. It was Emmeline Vance, whom Anduin had seen before. She reported to Barty Crouch, "Sir, the McKinnon family members have also arrived at the scene. Alice asked me to inform you." "Okay, thank you, Emmeline," Barty Crouch replied. He then turned to Arthur and Anduin. "I'm sorry, but I have to continue to appease Marlene's family." With that, Barty Crouch apparated away. Emmeline Vance greeted Arthur. "I'm sorry, Arthur, to bring you such news today. The Prewett brothers have always been our most trusted comrades in arms. I didn't expect this." Arthur silently shook his head at Emmeline and was about to leave with Anduin when suddenly a white vulture Patronus flew in front of Anduin. "This is my mother's Patronus. Could it be that something happened to Molly?" Frank recognized his mother's Patronus immediately. Arthur and Anduin looked nervously at the Patronus, hoping it wasn't bad news. Unfortunately, their fears were confirmed. The Patronus stopped in front of Anduin and said, "Anduin, are you with Arthur? Molly is too sad, and her amniotic fluid has broken. She may give birth early. I have rushed Molly to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Please come to the hospital as soon as you hear this. I have asked Mrs. Diggory to take care of the children at the Burrow." End of this chapter. Chapter 80, Dystocia. Arthur and Anduin turned pale upon hearing the news. Moody, recognizing the gravity of the situation, quickly addressed Frank. "Frank, you need to help too. I'll inform Alice, and Emmeline and I will work to contain Brother Whit's corpse. We can't afford any delays." Frank and Arthur nodded in agreement and, along with Anduin, apparated away. Emmeline Vance, who remained in the woods, expressed her concern. "God, I hope Molly is okay. So many tragedies have happened today." The trio apparated to an old-fashioned red brick department store. After explaining their purpose to the dummy in the store window, they passed through the glass and entered St. Mungo's Hospital. They approached the receptionist in the waiting room and learned that Molly had just been admitted and was now in a ward on the second floor. They rushed to the second floor, where Augusta was anxiously waiting outside the ward. Little Neville was not with her, likely entrusted to Mrs. Diggory's care. Seeing the three arrive, Augusta hurried forward to explain the situation. After several people had left, Augusta had notified Mrs. Diggory, who was staying at home. Together, they went to the Burrow to take care of Molly. At the time, Molly was in good condition, but would cry intermittently. After a while, Molly suddenly experienced abdominal pain. Augusta checked and found that Molly's amniotic fluid had broken, indicating the onset of labor. Mrs. Diggory panicked, unsure of what to do. However, the decisive Augusta quickly made arrangements. She asked Mrs. Diggory to stay and care for the children while she hurriedly sent Molly to the hospital. The ward was quickly arranged, and Molly was now undergoing treatment. Hearing this, Arthur became even more anxious. He wanted to rush into the ward to check on Molly, but feared disrupting the therapist's work. He paced back and forth in front of the ward door, frowning in worry. After a tense wait, the ward door finally opened, and a female therapist emerged. The group hurriedly approached her for an update. The therapist removed her mask and said, "The patient's condition has stabilized. She just drank a potion to regain her strength. However, her amniotic fluid has broken, and now we can only wait for the delivery." Anduin, curious, asked, "Why not perform a cesarean section?" "Cesarean section? What is that?" The therapist seemed puzzled. "The patient has regained some strength, but was very weak due to her sadness. The danger isn't over yet. All we can do is wait." Anduin frowned, frustrated by the lack of options. Arthur, anxious, asked, "Can I go in and see her? I'm Molly's husband." The therapist considered it and agreed to let Arthur visit, but only for a short time. After Arthur entered the ward, the remaining three sat on a bench in the corridor, waiting quietly. Anduin, realizing that waiting idly was not productive, suggested to Augusta, "I can stay here with Mr. Weasley. You and Frank should return to the burrow to help Mrs. Diggory. She might struggle to manage so many children alone." Frank thought for a moment and said, "I'll stay here. Mother, you should go back. I'll send a message to Alice and ask her to help you too, so neither side is left unattended." Augusta, worried about the burrow, agreed. Mrs. Diggory had brought Cedric to the burrow to help, and with little Neville, there were now 8 children there. Mrs. Diggory couldn't manage them all alone, so Augusta prepared to return to assist. She nodded in agreement. After Augusta left, Anduin and Frank waited for a while until Arthur finally emerged. He informed them that Molly was awake and her strength had returned. Now, they just had to wait for the delivery, hoping Molly would hold on. The 3 of them waited quietly outside the ward, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Anduin felt helpless. Although he had been a soldier in his previous life and was skilled in emergency treatment and dealing with wounds, he was powerless when it came to childbirth. They waited like this until late at night. Arthur Wu did periodically go into the ward to check on Molly, but the therapist advised against staying too long. Meanwhile, Augusta sent word that Mrs. Diggory and Cedric had gone home after dinner, and Alice had gone to the burrow to help. Everything was normal there. As the night wore on and the early hours of the morning approached, there was finally some movement in the ward. The 3 in the corridor could clearly hear Molly's painful cries, signaling that labor had begun. Arthur paced back and forth anxiously, his frequent footsteps adding to the tension. Anduin and Frank could only wait nervously. This continued for a few hours until dawn on August 8th. The shouting in the ward finally ceased, replaced by the high-pitched cry of a newborn. The faces of those outside the ward relaxed, but Arthur quickly became anxious again, worried about Molly. After a short while, the ward door opened, and the female therapist emerged to deliver the good news. Both mother and daughter were safe. Inside, Molly cradled her daughter, her face a mix of maternal love and lingering sorrow. Anduin couldn't help but fall silent. Joy and grief had come in quick succession, intertwining complex emotions in the ward. In the morning, Alice arrived at the hospital. She had requested leave from the Auror's office for both herself and Frank, and the Ministry of Magic had granted Arthur leave as well. The Longbottom family planned to take turns helping the Weasleys during this difficult time. The Weasley family needed time to process the sudden bad news and the joy of new life. For the next few days, Anduin and Augusta mostly stayed at the burrow, while Frank and Alice took turns watching over Molly in the hospital. Anduin primarily helped with cooking for the children at the burrow, while Augusta took care of their daily needs. The usually rambunctious Weasley children had been unusually quiet, clearly missing their mother. Arthur visited the burrow a few times, bringing good news to everyone and the children. Molly was recovering quickly and would be able to come home soon. However, the Weasleys' youngest daughter still needed breast milk, so the children couldn't see their little sister just yet. End of this chapter.